Episode 2 starts out with a flashback showing us Chief as a younger man, and also showing that he has decided to go AWOL, leaving the Spartan program with his fellow Spartan and buddy Soren. Chief has changed his mind at the last second, deciding to stay with the program, and he arms himself to go to try to convince Soren of the same. When they meet up outside the fence, they spend a few moments trying to convince one another of their own decisions. With Chief ultimately feigning a weapon jam to allow Soren to escape. It cuts back to the present day to show Chief and Mullet still on the run from the UNSC, now traveling through slip space in their Condor, which would have been pretty fucking handy last episode while they were traveling at a snail's pace on their way to Reach. They drop out of slip space into an asteroid field, and the proximity alarm starts going off. Mullet starts screaming her head off that they're gonna die, and the Chief calmly says, "Everything dies," and then tells her to buckle up. They come to an insurrectionist base called the Rubble, which is comprised of multiple asteroids. Chief lands and enters the compound, becoming surrounded by dozens of armed insurrectionists. Soren meets him, and they start heading to his personal compound. On their way to Soren's compound, while they're in the railcar, Chief of course takes off his helmet, and once they get to the compound, Soren requests that he remove his armor, and Chief actually fucking does this.
No, man. Shit, no, man.
They play a little catch-up getting to know you in Soren's compound, and Chief spends the night. We then cut to a UNSC ops meeting where they're basically shrugging off war crimes being committed by the new governor that they've installed, simply because gas prices are improving as a result of his willingness to work with them despite subjugating his own people. We also get more information about the true nature of Cortana within the TV show, that she will be supplanting the Spartans' minds instead of just being a companion to go along with them. It briefly cuts to the Covenant, and we see 3 prophets and the Covenant chick, who is aligned with them, debriefing the elite who witnessed Chief activate the artifact. When they find out that it's about the Halo, she declares that she'll go retrieve the artifact from the humans, as well as bring him the demon's head. She actually berates these hierarchs of the Covenant when they, even for a moment, question her about her not only capability to do the mission, but when she believes that they question her devotion and resolve.
How dare you!
The prophets, of course, just acquiesce and bow to her will. It cuts back to the Chief and Soren, with the Chief asking for help regarding the artifact. Soren says that he knows a guy who knows about this sort of stuff. He was a captive of the Covenant who somehow escaped. They head to where he's now being housed on this facility in what's kind of like an insane asylum. They meet Soren's contact, who's twitchy and erratic and basically batshit crazy. He does seem to know a good deal about the Covenant, though, about their motivations and religion, and the fact that the technology they seek is non-Covenant and predates the Covenant. He knows a fucking lot. I know everything! At one point during the meeting, he tries to club the Chief with the artifact, and when Chief grabs it to block, he activates it, and all the crazies freak out and go crazy. Chief freaks out when they freak out and gets all emotional. After the freak out, he briefly discusses his situation with the crazy guy and abruptly leaves the room, deciding that he needs the UNSC and the Spartans for help in figuring out what to do with the artifact. He and Soren have a little bit of a dust-up, with Soren giving him some shit for running back to Halsey for help, and the Chief calling Soren disloyal. Then he demands that Soren watch after Mullet while he's gone, because he's the only one outside of the UNSC that he trusts. Soren agrees to this out of loyalty to the Chief. Then Chief leaves the station and turns on his beacon, allowing himself to be found by the other Spartans. They take him back to Reach in custody, and Dr. Halsey debriefs him, asking about the artifact, brushing aside his concern about the memories that he's having, wanting to just maintain her control. The end of the episode sets up that they'll be studying the artifact more, and that they'll be introducing us to and installing Cortana, waking up the clone at the end of the episode. This second episode really just continues the mischaracterization of most characters, as well as ramping up the debasement of the lore and canon in general. Most all of the scenes seem to find a way to tear down characters or the franchise lore in general, even if they aren't intended to be that way. In the Bungie era lore, like the books, we see that the Spartan 2s many of them kind of accept their situation. They sort of realize what's going on, and I'm sure that as time goes on, they basically understand more or less what has happened to them. But at a young age, they basically decide for themselves that they will accept their situation and assume the role and responsibility of their protectors of humanity. Now, I mean, obviously they've been indoctrinated to feel this way, but I also feel like it's kind of shown that they accept it sort of nobly.
You have my sword.
Now, obviously, some of them don't feel this way, and there are attempts to escape, but by and large, it seems to show more of a nobility of their decision in the previous lore than especially this show. The heroes and previously compelling characters of the series are being hollowed out and broken down, and the UNSC is basically depicted as evil at every given opportunity. The flashback scene that was included basically just serves to establish character flaws that weren't previously present in the Chief. The scene from the TV series shows that Chief was intending to go AWOL and that he apparently had not resolved himself to this at a younger age. What's worse is he even changes his mind at the last minute, showing him to be an unreliable person and a bad friend to Soren, with Soren, of course, being so strong in his convictions that he's willing to die for his freedom. And even if they're not showing Soren as a paragon of goodness, they seem to intend him to be the more likable and sympathetic character in the series. At least at this point. Another thing about the flashback scene, I'm not going to lie, I really felt like they were setting up a gay moment, like a gay relationship for the Chief and Soren, and given some of their subsequent interactions as well, I don't really think that's completely off the table. Mullet's getting pretty chummy with the Chief for someone who had a deep and intrinsic hatred of the UNSC in general, and a personal vendetta against the guy himself for killing her mother. It's like they can't decide what to do with her. I realize he saved her in the last episode, but she just kind of flippant in her actions very often. They often interject her into situations when she doesn't have anything to say.
Dead air!
Chief, of course, continues to be mischaracterized and portrayed in a completely different manner than he would have been in previous canon, books, games, and lore. An early example of this in the episode is when they drop out of slip space and Mullet starts screaming that they're gonna die. His response that everything dies is pretty nihilistic.
They were nihilists, man.
Huh?
They kept saying they believe in nothing.
The Chief is not nihilistic. Yeah, he's stoic and he's minimalistic. Occasionally he has kind of a deal with it attitude, but he's not nihilistic, and this response just comes off as totally out of character. I think many fans would say that the Chief would likely say nothing at all and then just continue piloting the ship. If he were to say anything, I'd say it's likely that he might just tell her to buckle up, or he might say something like, "We'll be fine," and just continue piloting the ship.
What if you miss?
I won't.
I have so many questions in regard to when they get onto the Rubble, the insurrectionists' asteroid space station. First, how did he even get to this place? How did he know where it was? How did he gain access to land? Do they not use like squawk codes or call signs or monitor their space in any way? How did he get into an airlock? Why did all of these people not know that a Spartan was on until they saw him, if he was able to land and everything? If Soren had sort of given them the heads up, why did they freak out on him and draw their weapons in the first place? Also, why does Chief get into this place and immediately let himself become surrounded by potential hostiles? He's not invulnerable. This is again a situation where I feel like the early lore, say like the Bungie era lore, would have depicted Chief getting into this place totally undetected in some way. I mean, they wouldn't maybe even have had to explain it. Just have the Chief get in there and you're like, oh shit, he ninja'd his way in.
So annoying. Whoa! Margaret, what are you doing here?
Also, while they're on their way to Soren's compound, he's in this tiny rail car and feels comfortable to take his helmet off when he's surrounded by potential hostiles, or he could, something could fail and he could be zipped into the vacuum of space. Again, it's kind of just like an ill-prepared moment for the Chief, And this is one of the big problems that I think most people have with him taking his helmet off so often, is that he doesn't do it just to hide his face. That's not the purpose. He does it for functionality. He's just more capable when he has his helmet on. It enhances his hearing, his sight, gives him information. It protects him. I mean, I feel like that's the real problem that most people have with this. But not only does he take his helmet off, once they get to Soren's compound, Soren tells him to take his armor off, and Chief just, no biggie, takes his fucking armor off. Again, he's in this situation. He doesn't know if Soren could betray him. He doesn't know if some people could just go around Soren and come at him, and maybe he's not afraid of that per se, but he would want to safeguard himself against that. I think he would just be like, he wouldn't agree to Soren. He would just keep his armor on and be like, nah, I'm good. But again, the show has to, strip him of this whenever possible because they know it's going to bother fans. I feel like the lack of action and the focus on administrative bullshit, both in the form of procedural shit as well as like poorly executed political intrigue, it makes the show hard to watch, especially for someone who's not already into the Halo universe lore. Basically, people who aren't already fans of the series aren't going to give a shit about the characters unless you give them a reason to within the story, and you just haven't yet. And a lot of fans have already been turned off just by nature of the changes. So I don't really understand who their intended audience is supposed to be. I wonder if they thought that enough fans would deal with it, that they'd have enough of a built-in audience to get some word of mouth to new people. But at this point, it's kind of like a generic sci-fi show, and without the action that a lot of viewers, like new viewers and, longtime fans of the series, without the action that we want, you're not giving me a real big incentive because you don't have a good story and you don't have a lot of action yet. This episode also really ramps up the crusade against the UNSC as an evil organization. I feel like it's a strange choice because in the show you want the Covenant to be your bad guys, but you're also making the UNSC so evil that they're almost your bad guys also. And it's not like the insurrectionists can really be the good guys because they're not doing good things. Even though they're like freedom-loving, they're kind of also like out there stealing and pirating. So you're not making them the good guys. I just don't really understand where you're going with this. There's a lack of anybody that shows moral value other than like on an individual basis. I always viewed the UNSC as a fairly neutral organization in the canon and lore. They were a military organization that, sometimes, yes, might have been involved in horrible things, usually for the greater purpose of, like, saving humanity.
How can this be for the greater good? Shut it!
In this show, though, they just seem to be heaping any blame and evil that they can on the UNSC. I think to streamline it for audiences, they've removed Oni, which was always depicted as kind of the more shadowy and willing to do the more heinous things. But I feel like they've sort of gotten rid of that aspect, and so they've heaped all of it onto the UNSC, and you're not making anybody there all that sympathetic. Lord Hood is a good example of a character that they've changed in this regard as well. In the show, he's shown to be an uncaring and vapid bureaucrat who is so happy about better gas prices that he's willing to overlook war crimes by a political figure that he's installed in that area, and also willing to brush aside illegal human rights concerns.
Folks, I hate to spoil your fun, but there's no such thing as rights, okay? They're imaginary. We made them up, like the boogeyman.
When he's faced with a possibility of a better result in controlling his battle assets via mind control. So again, they're just really tearing his character down. In the games, the way he's depicted is as kind of a determined and competent, strong leader.
Negative, Admiral. Form a defensive perimeter around the cluster. Commander, get to your ship. Link up with the fleet.
Yes, sir.
You have the Mac gun, Cortana.
Even at the point in the end, when they're having a memorial service for the fallen soldiers and, even Master Chief, he's able to put aside his hatred that he's developed for the Covenant to shake the hand of the Arbiter as his, comrade, even though he says he can't forgive him. he's willing to move past it. That's not how he's being depicted in the show. He's being depicted more as a stuffy bureaucrat who's only worried about, achieving his immediate goal. The Covenant also are a confusing organization to show to like a new TV audience, and you've changed a lot from what fans would expect as well. The human female that's aligned with the Covenant not only doesn't really make sense, it just hasn't been explained yet. And I don't think that you have a good enough explanation to make it believable or satisfying. The Covenant have basically been boiled down to a generic sci-fi enemy at this point, and I don't know if you can change them from that at this point in the show. I'll go ahead and wrap up my ramblings for now, just by saying that a lot of the changes that they're making to the show don't only seem to be unnecessary, they almost seem in some way to be intended to aggravate fans. Now, that may not be the intention. It probably isn't per se, but the fact that this could have easily been a slam dunk, it could have been a layup for you guys. If you just got the story right, you didn't do this alternate timeline bullshit, and you actually characterized, elements of the story and characters, somewhat like they're shown in the lore and canon. But you chose instead to make all these changes, and I don't know if that's because, like I said, you thought that maybe the Halo name could stand on its own and draw in that audience, but I really feel like you're not correct in that. As far as I can tell, the show is not being well received largely. And really, it seems like article writers who are trying to pump up hype for this are the only ones that seem to really love the show. I have seen other comments here and there, so that's not to say everyone hates it, but more than anything, I'm seeing a lot of hate for the show and confusion as to why this is being done this way. So if you like this content, please like it, share, Rumble if you're using Rumble, subscribe. Comment to let me know your thoughts on it. Do you like the episode 2? Do you like the direction the show is taking? Do you think that it's a big deal to have Chief remove his helmet all the time and even his armor? Let me know your thoughts, and I'll see you on the next episode.